Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to Simply Put. In this video, we're going to be talking about a rather contentious issue, but one that I think is really important to talk about. And it involves the situation happening with Israel and Gaza right now. But more specifically, it's focusing on the kind of new uncommitted movement that sprouted up to basically have a protest vote and vote uncommitted in the Democratic primary as opposed to voting for Joe Biden. So in this video, I'm going to talk about just some context, how the movement started, how it performed in its first just test to see if there was any actual momentum here, the Biden team's response to that, where the movement kind of goes next, and then my general thoughts. So for context, if you haven't been following the news too much, which considering how negative it is, I can't fully blame you. The situation with Israel and the Gaza Strip right now has been absolutely horrible, to put it lightly. That's probably the one thing everyone can agree on, is that this is not a ideal. Even then, I don't even know if everyone could agree with that at this point. But I haven't talked about it yet for a few reasons, and one of them was really that I did not feel like I was the most qualified person to talk about it. But in order to really get what's going on with the uncommitted movement, you have to have at least a general framework of what is happening with Israel and Gaza right now. So, on October 7th, Hamas attacked Israel, killed over 1,000 people. What they did was absolutely terrible. No defense of what they did. However, I think if you're looking at the situation, it's very clear that what Israel's response has been for the last several months is incredibly over the top, and in my view, in the view of many others, is that they are committing genocide. So the definition of genocide, according to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, is that it's an internationally recognized crime where acts are committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. These acts fall into 5 categories, which are killing the members of a group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of this group, deliberately inflicting on-the-ground conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. And then these 2, I don't know if they fully apply, but they're still part of the definition: imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So if you haven't been following the news, what's been happening is that Israel has been relentlessly bombing this area that is around the size of New Jersey, killing hundreds of people every day. They are also making it incredibly difficult for aid to get into the area. They are starving them, and people are actually starting to die from just starvation now. They're blocking aid trucks. They're bombing and destroying hospitals and other civilian infrastructure. They're destroying water infrastructure so they can't have access to clean water. They're destroying bakeries where they can make bread and other things. And they're just flattening entire parts of this region. And this is being funded in large part by our tax dollars, thanks to our current president, Joe Biden. And if you look at just any of the pictures that are coming out of this area, I feel like even if you know very little about what's happening, you're just seeing children buried in rubble, just people like bleeding, just completely like skin and bone, and that's it. As of now, they just passed the 30,000 dead mark. It could be even more, because I feel like just the way that they count these metrics would be difficult, which is also, at the time of recording this, around 200 people dying a day so far. And if you're watching this and you are completely supportive of Israel, the only thing I could really say to you is that if you are completely supportive of them and what they're doing, and you are willing to completely back a military that is killing 12,000 children, or has killed 12,000 children as of me recording this, that number is going to go up, around 82 kids a day. If you believe that that is just and that is moral, and that those ends justify your means, then I think our value systems are just fundamentally different. And for me, that's not something I can get behind or back at all. Now, the current Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, says that he will not stop until Hamas is eradicated. Hamas is the terror group that carried out the October 7th attack. And it's such a lofty goal with no specific plan to actually achieve this that he's basically just using this as a blank check to justify any number of atrocities. And all it's doing is just making more people hate the US and hate Israel, which is just going to strengthen terrorists all around the world. So I have to say that before I get into this, so you could at least get the perspective that I am coming from with this. But anyway, with all of that happening in the backdrop of this, how this started was I am not alone in my discontent on this issue. And there's been discontent on Joe Biden, continuing to support the Israeli government here and funding them and using our bombs to carry out these atrocities. But Michigan is really where this movement started because there was a primary there that happened or a Democratic primary that happened there on February 27th. And for context, Michigan has a very large Arab American population. And many of the people who lived there, were seeing what was happening. They had either, one or several of their family members killed, directly / indirectly from what Joe Biden and his government was doing. And many people are just fed up with that. So a campaign called Listen to Michigan started, and it called on voters to not vote for Joe Biden, even though he's going to win the primary at this point. He doesn't have any serious competition. They said that you should vote uncommitted instead as a protest vote to kind of signal how unhappy you are with the Biden administration's handling of this issue. And despite the fact that this campaign sprouted up within 2 weeks of this primary actually happening and having very little funding, very little support, in terms of just infrastructure and from key figures, at a state, local, and national level. I mean, there was some state and local support, but it definitely it kind of came at the last minute. But despite the fact that they did not have a lot of time or funding to really get their point across, they were able to receive 100,000 votes, or around 13.3% of the vote. And I know what you're thinking, 100,000 in the grand scheme of things, that's not a lot of voters. But for context, Trump won Michigan in 2016 by 10,000 votes, and Joe Biden won by 150,000 votes in 2020. So the fact that 100 people, went to go vote in a primary where the winner was already decided, wait in line, drive however far to their polling place, and then choose uncommitted, I think shows that there is a real sense of discontent among Democrats. And I know what a lot of people in the mainstream media are saying, or people who are really supportive of the Democratic Party. They're like, all you're doing, you're just helping Donald Trump. You're going to get him reelected. You should just vote for Joe Biden because Trump is going to be worse. Which, as someone who definitely leans in the leftward direction, I agree with the fact that Trump would be worse. But I think that, while I guess it would show Joe Biden as a bit of a weak leader, for having such a big chunk of people say they'd rather just vote uncommitted than vote for him. I think that personally Joe Biden is hurting himself more by helping commit a genocide and writing a blank check to Benjamin Netanyahu's government, and I think that's just hurting him objectively much more than people voicing their discontent. And the thing that bothers me personally, and this is my opinion, is that it just feels like he is very entitled to everyone's votes, and he's like, I just have to be not as bad as Trump, which is just such a ridiculously low bar. So that it's very frustrating as someone who follows this stuff. And because there wasn't really a serious primary challenge to Joe Biden, anyone who is discontent with the status quo, who is not conservative and who is someone who is more democratic or leans left or whatever, they had no way to actually really voice their opinion and participate in small d democracy. So this has really been one of the only real ways to voice genuine dissatisfaction. And now that they got 10% or 13% of the vote, they received actually 2 delegates out of the 117 that the state of Michigan gives. The Biden team did respond. And I'm just going to read a quote from their national co-chair of the Biden campaign. He's had a really long quote. I'm just choosing kind of the main paragraph. because it kind of conveys the overall sentiment. But it basically says, we're going to continue to talk to them and then ask them to think about the choices and what the consequences are about electing someone who wants to have a Muslim ban, electing someone who is going to be much, much worse than the current circumstances we have right now. The president is going to reach out. We're going to continue to listen, and he is going to continue to work with them as we find an answer to this very difficult problem. And then another piece from a news source called Politico said that, quote, presidential aides continue to believe that today's uncommitted voters will be November Biden voters once they have a stark choice in front of them. So it really, they say that they're going to reach out. Really remains to be seen for the most part. They have some of his delegates kind of going out and talking, but in terms of actual policy change is what people are asking for. It doesn't really seem like that's something that they're seriously considering too much at this point. And it really, to me, it just seems like the current philosophy of the Joe Biden camp is, do you remember how bad Donald Trump was? We aren't him. Vote for us instead. Kind of fully leaning into the lesser of two evils philosophy that most people in this country absolutely despise. And it's not really an inspiring message. And, I do not like Donald Trump, but he has a very committed, passionate base of people who will turn out to vote for him. And, by continuing, and I have some poll numbers that I'll mention at the end of the video. But the fact that he has a very committed base of people and that Joe Biden's policy actions are directly hurting him and hurting his chances at re-election, I just don't necessarily think that the lesser of two evils is going to work here. And the Listen to Michigan campaign that I mentioned before that started this whole thing responded with, quote, it's deeply offensive that President Biden keeps suggesting that he has a messaging issue among Arab Americans and young people rather than a funding bombs issue. Biden's re-election chances will be judged by how much of Gaza is left standing in November. It is our hope that Biden chooses the people of America over sending Netanyahu a blank check for war and occupation, which it touches on some of the points that I made, pretty much that it just feels like an empty, kind of vapid response. And until there's actual substantial changes, then I don't think people are going to stop acting like this. So I guess the next question would be to ask is, what's next for this movement of people voting uncommitted? And even though only a few states have actually voted in the Democratic primary, not all of them actually even have voting uncommitted as a form of protesting. I'm going to list all the states that do. So if you live in one of these states, it's something for you to consider. There's Idaho, Montana, American Samoa, Colorado, Iowa, Massachusetts, Minnesota, North Carolina, Tennessee, Hawaii, D.C., New Jersey, Washington, Kansas, Missouri, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Wisconsin, Alaska, Wyoming, Maryland, Kentucky, New Mexico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And there are a lot of primaries coming up at the time of recording this next week, Super Tuesday. And despite, even though this is still relatively new, there's definitely been some momentum here. So for example, the big one that I saw was that the Washington state's largest union, the United Food and Commercial Workers, has endorsed the uncommitted vote in the Democratic primary over Joe Biden, and they have 50,000 members. Other states like Colorado have formal campaigns in place to get people to vote uncommitted. And also the other thing that I think is interesting is that a lot of major news entities like CNN and MSNBC have covered this. So it's to the point now where more people are actually aware of this movement and this idea and like a way to express discontent. So it's on people's radars more than it has been in the last 2 weeks. I can't predict how exactly it's gonna go. I mean, there's just so many factors, and this is a story that's definitely evolving pretty quickly. So I don't think it's fair to make any sweeping assumptions yet. We really need to see how it performs in other states before we can make any legitimate solutions or make any legitimate predictions on how this will go and if this will actually impact Biden's policy or not. But just to wrap up with my thoughts, I think that if you are opposed to what Biden is helping support in the Middle East and the genocide that he is committing, then I think you should, consider voting uncommitted in the Democratic primary. And like I said before, the thing that bothers me the most about this is that Biden feels just very entitled to all of our votes because he doesn't suck as much as Trump. And sure, definitely on a good handful of issues, Biden is better, at least in my view. Like Biden believes in climate change, and Trump would roll back a lot of his climate policies. I think Biden's Supreme Court picks would be better. Biden doesn't hate gay people, or like the LGBTQ plus community, like many people in the Trump camp do. Not saying that if you're a conservative you hate gay people or anything, but I still just don't think that we should give a president a blank check to commit one of the worst atrocities of this century just because he isn't as bad as one of the worst presidents this country has ever seen. I've already mentioned, but I am biased. I am rooting for this movement to scare the Biden campaign into doing the right thing. And if you're someone who wants Biden to win, and you actually want, if you want to see him win, then you honestly should be at least considering supporting this, because just electorally what he's doing, it just does not make sense. A recent poll found that 56% of respondents who identified as Democrats said they would be less likely to support a candidate who backs military assistance for Israel. And additionally, a plurality of Democrats, just around 50%, said that Israel is currently committing genocide. So with Biden doing all of these things, it's not like people who are voting for Democrats are going to feel really enthused to vote for Joe Biden. And it really, to me, just feels like Biden is playing a game of chicken with voters who helped give him the presidency. And that they just think, they think that they could really hedge on they'll come around and support us in November. And they're really willing to take that risk with someone who they've literally said would be like one of the most dangerous presidents this country has ever seen. To me, it's totally ridiculous, and I think they need to change course. So I personally support the Uncommitted movement, and I think it would be worth considering if you are also not supportive of what Joe Biden is helping contribute to in the Middle East. So with all of that being said, thank you for watching. If you found this informative or interesting, please leave a like. I would very much appreciate it. And I will see you all in the next video. Thank you.